Welcome to Mystic Dragon Chronicles, where every tale holds a lesson. Beyond fantasy, lesson that last. Let's step into the story. The egg cracked on a day nobody expected anything from Rowan. That was most days, honestly. He was 9 years old, small for his age, and lived in a children's home on the colony world of Vorath, a dusty, half built planet at the edge of human settled space. The home had 42 kids, two overworked staff members, and one broken heating unit that nobody had fixed in 3 years. Rowan had learned early that if he wanted something, he had to go find it himself. Nobody was coming to hand it to him. So when the Dracovari ships landed on the southern field and the entire colony buzzed with the news of the bonding rite, every adult told the children to stay back. The ceremony was closed. The Dracovari had made that very clear. No outsiders, no spectators, no humans. Rowan went anyway. He had heard about the Dracovari his whole life. Everyone had. They were the oldest known spacefaring species in the galaxy. Massive, armored, fire breathing, proud beyond any human capacity for pride. Their smallest adult stood 3 times the height of a grown man. Their scales turned away standard issue weapons. They had been crossing the stars before humanity learned to write, and they were not particularly impressed by humanity's recent attempts to catch up. The bonding rite happened once every 100 years. A clutch of eggs would hatch, and each hatchling would choose a lifelong kin bond, a companion, a sworn family member, someone whose life would be tied to theirs by Dracovari law. It was sacred, it was ancient, and it had never, not once in recorded history, produced a human match. Rowan did not know all of this. He just knew the ships were there, and that something alive was about to enter the world, and that he very badly wanted to see it. He squeezed through a gap in the temporary perimeter fence, crawled along the outer wall of the ceremony tent, and found a ventilation column wide enough to hide behind. From there, he could see everything. The tent was enormous and filled with Dracovari dignitaries, elders in ceremonial armor, officers standing at precise attention, observers from 3 other alien species, there by formal invitation. The air smelled like hot metal and something older, like stone that had been warm for centuries. In the center of the floor sat 14 eggs. Each one was the size of a small car, pale and faintly glowing, resting on carved stone platforms. A senior elder, ancient and scarred, stood at the front and spoke in low Dracovari tones that Rowan couldn't understand. The crowd was absolutely still. Then the eggs began to crack. One by one, the hatchlings emerged. They were small by Dracovari standards, roughly the size of a large dog, with scales still soft and eyes blinking against the light. Each one lifted its head, steadied itself, and then began to move. Some went immediately to Dracovari candidates, waiting on the left side of the floor. Some hesitated, circled, chose slowly. Each bonding was marked by a soft bioluminescent glow, light that pulsed from the hatchling's chest and the chosen companion's hand, confirming the bond was real. The 13th hatchling chose without hesitation. The 14th egg was the last to crack. Rowan watched the shell fall away in pale pieces. The hatchling inside was different from the others, smaller, with scales the color of pale gold and eyes that caught the light like a solar eclipse, dark in the center and burning at the edges. It stood up slowly, shook itself once, and looked around the room. It looked at the Dracovari candidates. It walked toward them, sniffed, and turned away. It looked at the alien observers. It considered them and moved on. The elder's expression shifted, not quite panic, but something close to it. The hatchling turned toward the back of the tent, toward the ventilation column, toward Rowan. He pressed himself flat against the column, heart hammering. The hatchling walked past the edge of the ceremony floor, past the stone platforms, across the open space between, and stopped directly in front of him. Up close, it was bigger than he thought. Its breath was warm, like standing near a furnace. Its eyes looked at him without blinking. Rowan did not run. He was not sure he remembered how. The hatchling pressed its snout against his chest. Not hard, just a touch. And then it made a sound, low and resonant, like a purr crossed with the sound of something enormous settling into place. The glow came without warning, from the hatchling's chest, from Rowan's hand, which he had raised without thinking, and pressed gently to the side of the hatchling's head. The light pulsed once, twice, and held. The entire ceremony hall went silent. The elder made a sound that Rowan would later learn meant something close to absolutely not. It did not matter. Dracovari law was clear. A bonding completed was a bonding sealed. It could not be undone by preference, protest, or politics. Not by an elder. Not by anyone. In the chaos of noise and movement that followed, Rowan stayed very still with his hand on the hatchling's head. She, he would learn the gender later, looked up at him with those eclipse-colored eyes and did not move away. He didn't have a name for her yet, but she had already decided he was hers. He would call her Salt. She would learn the word for warmth in his language. Neither of them understood yet what they had started. The colony governor was already on the comm with the diplomatic office, sweating through his collar. Rowan scratched gently behind Saul's ear. She made the furnace purr sound again. Outside the tent, the galaxy quietly began to shift. 15 years is a long time to go without hearing someone's voice. It is longer still when that someone breathes fire and is currently serving as a junior officer in the most powerful military fleet in the known galaxy, and you are a 24-year-old human diplomat's aide who still gets mistaken for an intern at formal events. Rowan had grown up inside the Dracovari educational system, one of fewer than 30 humans ever admitted to the academy on Vorath's orbital station. He had not been the best student. He had not been the most gifted. What he had been, consistently and without apology, was the last one to give up on anything. He learned 3 Dracovari dialects when one was considered sufficient. He studied xenobiology and ship mechanics and the formal protocols of 7 different alien governance structures. He did this not because anyone asked him to, but because he had learned at age 9 that if you wanted to matter in a room that wasn't built for you, you had to know more about the room than the people who designed it. He was posted now to a border relay station called Relay Point 7, a 6-deck structure that orbited a contested zone between Dracovari space and the territory claimed by the Keth Compact. The Keth were newer to interstellar politics, ambitious, and deeply unhappy about the Dracovari's habit of treating the galaxy's outer systems like a personal pantry. They were not wrong to be unhappy. They were becoming dangerous about it. Rowan's official job was to record diplomatic correspondence and route it to the correct offices. His unofficial job, which his supervisor Nira had quietly given him, was to keep communication lines open between both sides when things got tense. He was good at it. Not because he was charming, he was, at best, straightforward, but because he spoke to both sides in their own language and never pretended to be anything he wasn't. The incident began on a Tuesday, which was the galaxy's way of proving that catastrophes don't wait for dramatic timing. A Dracovari courier ship, small, fast, carrying encrypted Dominion records, was intercepted by a Keth patrol vessel near the station. The Keth claimed the courier had crossed their boundary marker. The Dracovari said the boundary marker was illegitimate. Both ships had weapons charged. The courier's crew of 4 were broadcasting on every channel. Nobody on the station spoke both languages well enough to do anything useful, except Rowan. Nira told him not to. He heard her saying it as he walked to the comm bay. He keyed into the open channel before she finished the sentence. What followed was 40 minutes of the most careful, exhausting conversation Rowan had ever conducted. He spoke to the Keth patrol commander in trade dialect, formal register, with the specific honorifics that indicated he was speaking as a neutral observer. He spoke to the Dracovari courier captain in High Dracovari, the kind used between equals, which surprised the captain enough to make him stop shouting for 30 seconds. He did not promise anyone anything. He did not threaten. He just kept talking, translating, clarifying, redirecting, while the courier crew quietly destroyed their sensitive manifest, and while Nira, sweating behind him, sent an emergency beacon to the nearest Dracovari response fleet. The fleet arrived before anyone fired. The Keth stood down. The courier crew was safe. 3 lives, no shots. One extremely unofficial intervention by a junior aide who technically had no authority to touch the com board. Nira wrote him up. Then she gave him a quiet commendation she filed under a different document number so it wouldn't be contradicted by the write up. Far across the station network, in a file room on Vorath Prime, an old Dracovari elder named Varek received a briefing on the incident. He sat with it for longer than his aide expected. Then he pulled a different file, one he had not opened in 15 years, and read it slowly. It had a human name at the top. Rowan did not know about any of this. He was eating a cold meal at his console and thinking about Saul, the way he sometimes did when things got quiet. He wondered what she looked like now. He had seen one image, forwarded through official channels 2 years ago, a Starguard unit photograph. She had been in the back row. Even in the back row, she dominated the frame. Pale gold scales, now hardened into full adult armor. Eclipse eyes, unchanged. She was enormous, and she looked serious, and she was carrying the scorched stone fragment from the ceremony floor in a small pouch at her throat, which Rowan had only noticed after staring at the image for an embarrassing length of time. She was somewhere out in Dracovari space. Her reassignment request to the border region was, as far as he knew, still pending. They had not spoken in 15 years. That was protocol. A hatchling needed to mature without leaning on the bond. He understood it. He had never liked it. He did not know that 3 days after the relay incident, the Keth extremist faction that the patrol commander reported to had marked his name. He did not know they had acquired the station's crew manifest. He did not know that what felt like a quiet week at Relay Point 7 was, to 4 people in a Keth planning room, the beginning of a cleanup operation. He found out when the docking alarm went off at 0300 and every light on the station switched to red. By 0310, the station had been boarded. By 0320, Rowan was alone in the maintenance corridor network with a broken comm unit, one emergency beacon he was not yet ready to use, and the very specific, very calm kind of fear that comes from knowing exactly how bad the situation is. He started moving. He kept moving. He had learned a long time ago that you do not stop. Somewhere in the dark between stars, a kin bond that had waited 15 years quietly caught fire. Corridor 7G smelled like recycled air and old fear. Rowan had been in it for 11 hours. He knew the station's maintenance grid better than most people knew their own homes. He had made a point of learning it, the same way he had made a point of learning everything that might one day matter in a situation where nothing else was available to him. He had no weapons. He had a fire suppression canister he had pulled from the wall at hour 2, a length of insulated cable, and a broken comm unit that received partial signals but sent nothing. The Keth boarding team was 8 soldiers. They were methodical and they knew station layouts. Every few hours he heard their sweep patterns getting tighter. He moved when they moved. He stayed low. He breathed slowly. He had already used the fire suppression canister on 2 of them in Corridor 9B. A burst of white chemical fog to the visors. Enough to blind them for 90 seconds. Enough to put 2 more decks between himself and them. He was not pretending he could do this indefinitely. At hour 9, crouched in a junction behind a ventilation housing, he had pulled out the emergency beacon and held it. One press. It would broadcast his location to every ship within range, including the Keth vessel docked to the station's upper port. He put it back. Not yet. He needed a reason to believe someone friendly was within range before he lit himself up like a signal fire. At hour 11, the station structure groaned, not the usual groan of a pressurized hull or a ventilation cycle. Something had hit the outer wall, something large. Then the lights in the corridor flickered. Then the Kethcom channel, which Rowan had been monitoring through his broken unit's partial receiver, erupted in noise. Voices cutting over each other, alarm tones. One word in Keth that Rowan translated instantly because he knew the language, because of course he did. The word was Dracovari. He did not let himself feel it yet. He moved instead, tracking the sounds through the hull, using the vibration patterns to figure out where the breach was. Upper port. No. Midsection. The impact signature was too big for a standard dock. Something had not docked. Something had hit. The far end of Corridor 7G ended at a sealed bulkhead door rated for vacuum exposure. Standard steel alloy construction, 40 millimeters thick. Rowan had assessed it 11 hours ago and categorized it as an exit he could not use. The door caved inward in one piece, not exploded, not cut through, pushed, like it was a cabinet door and someone had simply decided it should be open. The shape that came through it had to turn sideways and lower its head to fit into the corridor. Even then, it filled the space from wall to wall and floor to ceiling almost completely. Pale gold scales caught the emergency lighting and threw it back in warm fragments. Eclipse eyes, dark centers, burning edges, scanned the corridor in both directions and then stopped. Stopped on Rowan. Soreth was 12 meters long. Her scales had fully hardened into adult armor. Her wingspan, folded flat against her body to fit through the corridor, still added another meter on each side. She was, by any measure, one of the most dangerous beings in this sector of the galaxy. She looked at the human crouched against the wall beside a ventilation housing, holding a length of cable and a dented suppression canister. Rowan looked back at her. "You're late," he said. Soreth's nostrils flared. "You smell like someone who has been hiding in a recycling duct for 11 hours. That's fair." She moved toward him, carefully in the tight space, precise in the way that something very large learns to be precise when the world around it is small. She lowered her head until it was level with his and looked at him the way she had looked at him when she was the size of a large dog and he was 9 years old, and neither of them knew what they were starting. He put his hand on the side of her head. The kin glow came back like it had never left, steady, warm, pulsing twice and holding. His hand, her scales. 15 years, and it was the same light. From deeper in the station, the sound of the Keth boarding team advancing and then stopping. Then the sound of 8 soldiers arriving at a corridor junction to find a fully matured Dracovari Starguard officer standing between them and their target. The team commander made a decision that Rowan would later describe generously as the smartest thing a Keth soldier had done all week. He put down his weapon. The rest followed within seconds. Soreth's unit commander, Davan, arrived on the station 20 minutes later. He was a serious officer who had not survived a long military career by being easily surprised. He walked through the breached bulkhead, past the contained Keth soldiers, down Corridor 7G, and found Soreth sitting on the station floor with a human leaning against her side like she was a wall. The human appeared to be eating a ration bar he had found somewhere in the maintenance grid. Soreth appeared to be reading the Keth com logs on a salvaged unit, identifying who had authorized the boarding. Davin stood there for a moment. Then he took out his report pad. The after-action summary he filed was 4 pages long and contained the phrase "outside expected parameters" 11 times. But inside the corridor, none of that mattered yet. What mattered was that Soreth pulled the small stone fragment from the pouch at her throat, scorched, worn smooth from years of handling, and set it on the floor between them. Rowan looked at it. He looked at her. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and took out something he had carried since he was 9 years old. A piece of stone, the same size, the same scorch pattern. The other half. He had dug it out of the ceremony floor the morning after she left. He had never told anyone. Sol looked at the two pieces for a long moment. Then she made the furnace purr sound that Rowan had not heard in 15 years. It sounded exactly the same. Nobody told Rowan what the Grand Assembly Hall looked like from the floor until he was already standing in it. He had imagined something large. He had not imagined this. The hall on Vorath Prime was carved from the base of a mountain, not built into it, but carved out of it, walls and ceiling shaped from a single continuous piece of black volcanic rock that had been worked over centuries into smooth sloping curves. The floor was polished dark stone. The seats rose in rings above him, tier after tier, filled with Dracovari Council members in full ceremonial colors: red, gold, deep gray. There were 400 of them. The lowest seat in the lowest tier was still 15 feet above his head. He was the smallest thing in the room, by a factor that could not be reasonably expressed. It had taken 3 weeks to get here. 3 weeks of emergency FTL jumps, two interception attempts by Keth vessels, working for the rogue faction that had authorized the boarding, a 6-hour period during which Soreth had personally destroyed a pursuit drone with her claws, because the ship's weapon systems were running a reload cycle and more paperwork than Rowan had produced in his entire diplomatic career. The evidence he carried, the intercepted Keth communications, the recording of everything he had overheard in Corridor 7G during those 11 hours, had been verified, authenticated, and submitted through 4 separate legal channels. Elder Varek had cleared his testimony for the floor. Nobody could stop what was about to happen. The rogue faction had tried. They had been very creative about it. None of it had worked. Rowan walked to the speaker's platform and set his materials down. He straightened his jacket. He looked up at 400 Dracovari dignitaries looking down at him, which was an experience he suspected very few humans had ever had and survived emotionally intact. Then he began to speak. He spoke in formal High Dracovari, the dialect of the council floor, because there was no version of this testimony that he was going to deliver in any language other than the one this room respected. He was precise. He was factual. He presented the intercepted communications first. He walked through the timeline of the boarding and explained clearly what the rogue faction had been negotiating in secret. A partition of the contested border zone that would have removed human colony worlds from Dominion Treaty protection entirely and handed the region to the Keth in exchange for resource rights. He was 15 minutes into his testimony when the rogue faction's chief representative rose and challenged the validity of his account. Human testimony, the representative said, should not be held to Dracovari evidentiary standards. A human witness was not a Dracovari witness. The hall was quiet for exactly 3 seconds. Then Elder Varek from the high bench spoke 4 words. He carries a bond. The representative started to respond. He carries a Dracovari bond, Varek said again, and his voice was the kind of quiet that has never needed to be loud. His word is Dracovari word. Sit down. The representative sat down. Rowan finished his testimony. When he was done, he stood still and waited, the way he had learned to wait in rooms that were not built for him, without apology, without shrinking, without filling the silence with anything unnecessary. The council deliberated for 2 hours. The rogue faction's activities were stripped open layer by layer. 3 senior members were removed from their seats before the session ended. The secret partition agreement was formally voided. The human colony worlds in the border zone remained under Dominion Treaty protection. Then Varek called for a secondary motion. The Kinward Accord had been a theoretical document for decades, a legal framework that would give kin bonds between Dracovari and non-Dracovari full diplomatic and legal recognition. It had been proposed before. It had always stalled. Today, with a human standing on the speaker's floor who had survived a boarding, carried evidence across a war zone, and addressed the Grand Assembly in better formal Dracovari than half the officials in the room, it did not stall. The vote passed with 381 in favor. When the announcement was read, Soreth, waiting in the outer hall, made a sound that shook the corridor walls. Davin, standing beside her, chose not to document this in his report. They offered Rowan Dracovari citizenship before he stepped off the platform. He said yes on one condition, that the offer be extended to every human who had ever completed the Dracovari Academy program. There were 29 of them. The council conferred for 4 minutes and agreed. That evening, on the roof terrace of the assembly hall, the twin moons of Vorath Prime were rising, and the air was warm in the way it only got in high summer, and Soreth was taking up most of the terrace because there was no version of this situation where she was a reasonable size. Rowan sat against her side with a worn deck of cards and dealt out a hand. She lost the first game. She blamed her claws. She lost the second game. She blamed the light. She lost the third game and stared at him with eclipse eyes narrowed. I have been letting you win, Rowan said, for 24 years. That is not true. It is a little true. She huffed a breath warm enough to curl the edges of the cards. He laughed, a real one, the kind that had been stored up a long time, and she made the furnace purr sound that meant, in a language older than any of this, that she was home. Somewhere in the archive office below, the records clerk was staring at her screen and trying to find the right words for the cause of document field on the Kinward Accord filing. She had been at it for an hour. Finally, she typed, a hatchling made a choice. A boy did not walk away. The rest is history. She filed it, she went home, and the document sat in the archive for the next 300 years, pulled up and read so many times that the access counter eventually stopped making sense, because it turned out that across every species, in every language, across every corner of the known galaxy, everyone wanted to know the story of the boy who got chosen.